Thank you very much for your introduction, and please also accept my apologies because I will have to leave before the end of the session. Um, I think that what I would like to make is a few points about the context in which we discuss the ways to increase and de-risk climate finance, and indeed bounce back on one of the former intervenants in the previous session says, which is we need a change of mindset. Without any doubt, I mean, the needs are huge. I mean, numbered by trillions that go anywhere in between 1.3 or even 2 before 2030. So no doubt about that. But I think it's important to address those by considering the context and to change the paradigm. I will limit my focus to Africa. But I think it's the same for all developing countries. First, we all know about Africa Unite climate context. Africa is, as everybody now says, the least responsible and the most affected continent by climate change. Between 1850 and 2021, Africa was responsible for less than 3% of the global fuel emissions, compared to over 75% for OECD, Russia, China together. 7 of the 10 most vulnerable countries at global level are in Africa. All this is linked to a still low level of development, which means that short term, Africa will still be a low emitter, but development needs are there. And we have said before that when it comes to SDGs in Africa or Agenda 2063, we are totally off track. So it means 4 things. Whatever the discussion and decision-making are about, we need to bridge silos. Ibrahim talked about coordinating and joint forces, but I think that bridging silos is also important. When I'm saying bridging silos, I'm talking about climate and development. We can't afford to save the planet to the expense of its people, or securing the future to the expense of the present. And I think that this is key when it comes to talking about access to energy in Africa. I'll come back to this later. We also need to see the link between climate development and conflict. Why I'm saying all this, it's because when we are talking about risk, we also need to talk about this. The link between climate development and conflict is absolutely key. The more climate impact, the less development, mean more displacement, unmanaged and unwilling migrations, more tensions and conflicts. Look at the reason the Darfur crisis began. It was linked to a climate crisis and drought and the inability to feed the cattle. For Africa and developing countries, the second point is that for Africa and developing countries, adaptation is far more important than mitigation. But the fact is that the current climate debate, which is still mainly driven by already developed countries and biggest emitters, focus on mitigation. And when you look at NDCs, they are focusing on mitigation, and they probably don't take enough into account the adaptation needs of African countries. Third point, we need to find a way out of this still heated debate around energy. Access to energy in Africa is still too limited. 600 million people are still lacking access to energy. Without energy, there is no health, no education, no jobs, no business. So we need to address this problem. We need to also recognize that renewable won't be enough to address this issue in the short term. So we need to work on that. And we need also to see that production is not enough, which means working on distribution, the famous last mile, transport, storage, and ensuring there is a market, which for the time being is still too weak in Africa, given the way that needs to be done towards continental integration. Now, the fourth point, which I think is very important, is we mustn't limit the debate when we talk about climate in Africa to just specific vulnerability challenges. I think it's very important to, and this is too, if you allow me, too humanitarian, to what can the developed world do to help Africa? This is done. I mean, this is last century. We absolutely need to make the point about Africa's potential in being a key actor and a key stakeholder and a key player, a first-rank player in building a green global economy. Think about African green minerals. Most of the critical minerals are hosted in Africa, and in most critical minerals, African countries are among the first three producers. We need to look at the carbon sinking potential of Africa, big in the forest or in the oceans. We need to look at biodiversity. So Africa's potential and making way into this Africa potential, unleashing, leveraging this Africa's potential is absolutely key. Which means that when we are talking about risk, we also need to talk about investment, about interest, sorry. And there the risk approach becomes slightly different. So, and last point, maybe building infrastructures in cities is going to be a key point in Africa, given the demographic trends. So what can we do to build climate-friendly and climate-sustainable infrastructures and cities? Climate-friendly means addressing decarbonization in cement and steel industries. Climate sustainable is supporting different weather conditions and natural disasters. Africa can leapfrog and probably show the way, because it's beginning more from scratch, what it takes to build climate-friendly infrastructure and to build climate-friendly agriculture. So once again, have a different approach to this climate needs in Africa. It's probably also climate potential in Africa. I'm not going to go through the various tools, but I'm happy to also jump back on what Minister Fouad said. We recently issued a report at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. The title was Financing Africa, Where's the Money? And one of our main conclusions was basically, of course, we need more money, but the issue and the challenge is better money rather than more money. So we need to work on the tools and the processes. When we are looking at the various tools of how to finance Africa in general and how to finance climate more specifically, there's a lot of proposals on the table. Taxes, high net worth individual, airlines, air or maritime transport. I'll just take one example, which is SDRs. There has been a key decision of putting on the table 650 million additional SDRs post-COVID to help countries to deal with the COVID impact. That was a great decision. Less than 10% of it was allocated to the most needing countries because of the mechanisms. It has taken 2 years, more than 2 years, to make sure that we could devise a relevant mechanism to allow these additional SDRs to go to the countries that needed it the most. We can certainly think about an additional SDRs climate related, but we need to make sure that it doesn't take another 2 or 3 years to make them go to the needed countries. So I'll stop there. Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much.